Smoke from Canadian wildfires forces the Rockford Park District to cancel more outdoor events Thursday as the air quality remains unhealthy. The district canceled playground programs at Key Malquist and Watts on Thursday. Several others were canceled over the past 2 days. All softball and volleyball games are canceled for Thursday at Sports Court 2. Leaders hope to reschedule those matches for a later date. Now, we're very well aware of the threat that Canadian wildfire smoke poses against our health, but how about the health of our pets? 23 News reporter Jake Pearson speaks with experts about their efforts to protect animals and wildlife from harmful pollutants.
Experts tell me smoke conditions can be especially dangerous for puppies and senior dogs, as well as pet birds, but there are some actions you can take to remedy the issue.
It doesn't matter if the air is bad, if it's too hot, if it's too cold. We're out there because the animals depend on us.
This is the mission of Summerfield Farm and Zoo in Belvedere, who face setbacks as a result of poor air quality in the state. Protecting guests is important, but so is the safety of animals.
It would also affect animals. They have lungs just like all mammals do. And like I said, we're trying to keep them from breathing too heavily by keeping them calm, keeping them cool. They don't have actually a lot of visitors today because of the weather.
Pets like dogs or cats are also vulnerable to dangerous pollutants. Experts say to minimize the amount of time your pets are outdoors and to avoid opening windows before leaving your home.
We have seen a lot more environmental allergy reactions. So people who have had pets that have had allergic reactions or environmental allergies before, they're seeing it's a lot worse this summer.
While some animals are kept in controlled climates, outdoor animals may not have the same luxury. Although breathing is a main concern, smoke can have other effects on pets.
We would advise against taking them out on long, heavy walks or hikes, things of that nature. People with older pets definitely want to make sure they're kept indoors as much as possible, reduce activity if possible.
There are some signs of smoke inhalation that you can watch for in pets, like coughing, gagging, red or watery eyes, nasal discharge, and inflammation of the throat or mouth. You might notice this if your pet is reluctant to eat hard foods.
Definitely some good information to have. Thanks, Jake. Experts say owners who have pets with those smushed in faces like pugs or bulldogs should take extra precaution when letting them outside to avoid those heightened respiratory issues.